All right. Thank you for that intro, Joe. As you said, I'm going to talk today about how we use reverse ETL at Lucid. And before we start, just a little bit of background information. I work for Lucid. We're a software company headquartered in South Jordan, Utah. We offer a suite of visual collaboration products. And if you'd like to learn more, I'd encourage you to visit our website, lucid.co. I'm a manager on the strategy and analytics team. And in addition to direct analytics support for part of the data, I'm also responsible for our analytics engineering team. We already did the shameless plug for hiring, so I won't do that again. So what exactly are we going to talk about today? We'll start just by going over Lucid's data landscape and defining reverse ETL. After that, we'll dig into two ways that we use reverse ETL at Lucid, updating our marketing automation software and pushing offline conversions into some of our ad platforms. Then lastly, we'll just talk about a few other applications, some planned applications, and what I feel is the key takeaway from my talk today. There's also a number of things that we're not going to talk about today, not because they aren't super important, but because they're big enough topics that they probably deserve a conversation all of their own. And on some of them, I just don't feel like I'm a credible source just yet. So we're not going to talk about organizational change aspects of reverse ETL. What happens when you've got the status quo and you introduce a new tool to try to change things, to try to make things better. We're not going to focus on data warehouse transformations. I'm just going to assume that a data warehouse is a black box where the transformations happen. And we're not going to talk about ETL tools. Reverse ETL makes it sound like we might talk about ETL tools, but we're going to skip over that today. And then lastly, we're not going to compare reverse ETL for ETL versus ELT-centric paradigms. At Lucid, we have a extract load transform paradigm, so I'm going to frame our discussion around that. Your own tech stack may differ. So this chart describes just some of Lucid's data landscape. It's pretty typical and familiar to anybody who's seen a few of these. We grab data from our source of record systems, like billing system, our own product, and we push that data into our data warehouse. Within the data warehouse, we clean and organize that data, mostly using dbt. We also use Databricks for some of our statistical and predictive modeling. And then out of the data warehouse, we use that data for ad hoc analyses. We do occasionally download CSVs, which isn't my favorite, but sometimes that makes the most sense. And we do a lot of visualization in Tableau. That's our visualization suite. So now that we've talked about the data landscape for our discussion, let's define reverse ETL. I really like this quote from Tejas, and I won't attempt to pronounce his last name, but he's the CEO of hightouch, one of the companies in the reverse ETL space. They're the company that we use at Lucid. And he says that reverse ETL is the process of copying data from a cloud data warehouse to operational systems of record. So visually, that's just these red dashed lines here, taking the outputs and pushing them into other systems. Some of those are the same systems that we get data from to put into the data warehouse. And some of them are systems that, they're just destinations. They aren't really sources of data, but they're important for the business operationally. So now let's dive into one of the ways that we use reverse ETL. And before I start, I've got a little bit of a confession. We actually haven't finished building this particular application yet. In fact, I plan to implement it in our sandbox environment tomorrow afternoon, because we don't send a whole lot of emails on Friday. And then I plan to implement it in our production environment the following week. But I feel like it's a great use case to talk about why reverse ETL can be an important asset to your data stack. And we're going to focus on just updating lead information in our marketing automation software. So for people who aren't familiar with marketing automation, it really just allows our marketing team to send email campaigns to targeted users. I'm sure your guys' inbox is a lot like mine. You probably get about 10 of these a day. Sometimes they're helpful, a lot of times they're not. But it's a marketing automation system that powers that. This is an overgeneralization, but you can think of it as a very fancy Rolodex combined with an email scheduler. It lets our marketing team identify people they want to include in an email campaign and send them emails. It's absolutely central to the marketing team's workflow. They're in it every day, and that's a detail that becomes pretty important later on in our conversation. The biggest needs for this fancy Rolodex is just really having a list of all the people that you might want to email, and then contextual information about those people that might tell you how to do the email. So our marketing team came to us and basically said, there's some data we want to get in our automation system that isn't currently there. You know, we've got all this other data flowing in from all these other places, but for this particular bit of data, we can't really get, and we hear you have that data in Snowflake. So can we please have it? And as we started talking with the people who have been helping maintain our infrastructure there, it quickly became apparent that, you know, maybe it isn't, we're not in an ideal situation right now as far as keeping this tool up to date goes. Now, just to reiterate, a lead is just a person that we want to email. There's really two challenges in keeping leads up to date. The first one is just figuring out which of our users should be leads so that we can add them or remove them, to include them or exclude them from marketing campaigns. I just think of that as a grain corrections problem. Are all the people who should be there? And then the second one is just keeping that contextual information up to date. Stuff like their name, their subscription level, the date they were last active, different things that can help craft the right email and determine if they should get one. Unfortunately, the logic for which users ought to be leads is actually rather convoluted. This is really just a very brief overview of what that might be. But basically, there's like a dozen or a couple dozen different fields that come from different source systems that all participate in determining whether or not a user in our product ought to be a lead in our marketing automation system. Stuff like, when did they just get a subscription? What's their persona? Have we tried to email them, but their email bounced? And a lot of that data requires pretty significant cleaning. For example, persona data. If you've worked with persona data before, you know that it's super messy. Some of it's categorical, some of it might be typed out by users. It changes over the course of the company's lifetime, like how you pull that data in. And so all of that needs to be cleaned and then combined into a set of business logic just to determine who ought to be a lead. There's our big takeaways. comes from a bunch of source systems. It needs a ton of cleaning. And then once you've figured out who ought to be leads, you're only half done. You have to populate all of these different fields that describe that lead, and each of those can rely on pretty nuanced logic. This is just a brief surface depiction of how we might look at the question of what country is this lead located in. And similar to before, your big takeaways are it can come from a bunch of different sources. That the data used to calculate location comes from a bunch of different source systems. They all need cleaning. And most importantly, many of those fields, this field in particular, is already calculated in our data warehouse. We use it in a bunch of different places. It's not just our marketing team that's interested in that. It's actually quite a few people. So this is kind of our current implementation. This is the implementation that I'm trying to replace. We currently solve this problem without reverse ETL. And perhaps this diagram doesn't quite do it justice, but if I were to draw the actual diagram, I wouldn't have any room for a title, and it would just not be very easy for you to look at. But basically, we're taking all of the data that we move in, a bunch of the data that we move into our data warehouse, and we're also passing it into this custom data pipe that performs a bunch of business logic and then chooses which leads to push into the marketing automation system. And then there's a totally different job that swoops in and populates those leads with contextual information. It's messy. Nearly all of our third-party tools contribute data to this thing, and it just creates a situation that's difficult to maintain. The big things to shout out here is there is no single source of truth for the business logic that goes into defining a lead, either for the data that is part of that decision or for the decision itself. This is also a huge amount of duplicated effort. We already clean the data in our warehouse, and now somebody else has to come up with a way to clean it outside of our warehouse in a data pipe. The end result of this approach is that the data in our marketing automation system is frequently stale, and it's often inconsistent with data in our data warehouse. Now, if you take this problem and you multiply it across a bunch of third-party tools, what you find is that every single tool is connected to every single other tool several different ways to pass different kinds of data depending on the specific use case. And that complication or that complicated system really grows organically as needs come up in the business. So it's probably not a big surprise in a talk about reverse ETL that surprise, the solution is to use reverse ETL, but it really is. And we take the data that we're already deriving in our data warehouse, we just combine it to say, okay, what are the factors that should make someone a lead? What are the factors that should make somebody not a lead? It's a very simple data model to build in there. And then we've already got all the information that we want to include to provide context on that lead. So we just assemble that, join it together in our data warehouse, and then set up a reverse ETL sync to mirror that list in our marketing automation system. The biggest benefit of this approach is that it maintains our data warehouse as a single source of truth. That's in my mind reason enough to do it, just because sometimes I wonder if it's worse to have inconsistent data than it is to have incorrect data. And when you have parallel sources of truth going, you guarantee inconsistent data. If not because the algorithm is different, then because you have latency issues and timing issues that might cause the data to be inconsistent. It also reduces our duplicated effort. And the end result of this approach is that the third-party tool that we're pushing data to, the marketing automation system stays perfectly in sync with our data warehouse. So when somebody in marketing says, hey, I've got a question about the people we sent these emails to, or if I wanted to send an email, gosh, there's this group of users I might want to include on it. Can we get some more information on them? It's easy for one of the analysts on our team to say, yes, I can help you with that because I know exactly what data is in your marketing automation system. And then remember back to when I said that, our marketing team, the automation system is their bread and butter. They're in it every day. Now, that's important here because we're giving them the data where it needs to be used. We're giving them the data where they want to use it. Yes, we could hypothetically go off and create a dashboard or do some ad hoc stuff, but all of that is an additional point of friction in their job. They'd much rather just have accurate data that's up to date where they need to use it. So that's the end of the first case study. Questions on that particular one before we move on?
I have a question. Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So my understanding is that you have this clean data that you need to send back upstream, right, to enrich their data sources. So why not put this clean data, say, on a Kafka queue and have any consumer consume it from there, whether it's your upstream systems or somebody else? Yeah, why not do that?
So I think in order to do that, you would have to have all of those systems be able to integrate with where you put the data. I think in some ways you are describing a way to do reverse ETL, but I think the big difference is whether it's push versus pull. I could just put the data somewhere and have other places pull that data out or subscribe to that data. But the difference with reverse ETL is instead of waiting for people to pull the data, you're actively pushing the data to it.
Yeah, but with that push model come other complexities such as back pressure handling, right? Because you can overload consumers. So now
I'm not really worried about overloading the consumers. I am worried about API calls. I'm worried about overloading whatever tool I'm writing to. A good reverse ETL tool will let you manage that. Does that help with your question?
No, no, I understand what you're saying. I thought that the bigger problem would be actually composing or putting together the final state of your entities, because Kafka is usually used for like streaming, right? So you have this sourcing of event sourcing, sorry. And so something has to put together this final state, and maintaining that final state and sharing and pushing it upstream. I thought that would be the challenge, because otherwise I think Kafka as a decoupler, as a mechanism for decoupling consumers would be superior to
I think if you were sending incredible amounts of data, then this approach might struggle a bit more. Maybe you do want something that's streaming the data to wherever it's going. But like, for instance, this particular use case, we're talking in between 10 and 20 million rows that it's keeping synchronized. That's pretty simple. The other big advantage is this just makes it very easy to mirror a table in its destination. So you're not just pushing rows or pushing updates, but you're actively updating it as the source data changes. So that's another distinction that can be important.
Understood. Thank you.
Oh, not a problem. Any other questions? All right, let's move forward. So for our second case study, we do have a question. With a data observability tool like Monte Carlo, would we want to connect to a reverse ETL to check for anomalies on that level, or would that just be handled at the Snowflake level? That is a great question. I think there's kind of two places where you might care about anomalies. One would be, is this mirroring working properly? And I think in an ideal scenario, you're buying a reverse ETL tool that is reliable and has its own detection for when there's issues with the sync. Now, are there anomalies in the source data? I think that is extremely important. Monte Carlo is a great tool for that. We don't use that particular one at Lucid. We use our own homebrew anomaly detection engine right now. But I probably would want to handle anomaly detection in Snowflake rather than trying to catch it in transit. Does that make sense? Awesome. Any other questions? Cool. So for this second example, let's talk about ad platform offline conversions. And this one is, it's currently running right now. We've had it going for about, gosh, several months now. It's been a huge return to the business in terms of value and impact. But real quick for background on offline conversions, an offline conversion is when somebody clicks a page search link and then buys our product. Oh, I don't know what just happened there. I think I clicked on the wrong thing. All right. So I'm sure you've all seen this kind of ad before. Every time you search anything, basically the flow is somebody clicks on a page search link. We capture the unique identifier for their click, and we get information on the keyword that referred them and the search engine that referred them. Separately, that user can decide to use our product and start a subscription. Then we're able to associate their new subscription with that referring keyword on that referring platform. And there's a lot more to it, but the takeaway I want you to have is that we can optimize our keyword bidding by sending the value of an offline conversion back to that ad platform. It really is this simple. You pull the data in, you do a bunch of data science magic, and then you push the data on to the ad platform. It does require a ton of contextual information about a user, about their account. That all feeds into the data science magic. But you want the main focus of this kind of project to be on generating those predictions for conversions, for keyword values. You don't want to waste time just trying to figure out how to get the data from A to B. Now, it's worth noting that our data warehouse is actually the source system for those predictions. They don't originate upstream. The logic, the statistics, that's actually in the data warehouse. So really the value of reverse ETL here is just that it lets us focus on generating those predictions, not on how we get them into our ad platforms. This is just a screenshot of that sync in hightouch as of 9 a.m. this morning. It looks like I've got about 70 rows that need my attention. But the point I want to leave you with is that setting this up took about 15 minutes. Like that was end to end all the effort that went into just getting the data from A to B. We spent 2 months, 3 months on the predictive model, and all comparatively no time whatsoever on just getting the data to where it needed to be. Now, before we wanted to use reverse ETL for this, we were sitting down and talking with an engineering team about, well, what is the API for Google Ads? What's the API for Facebook for LinkedIn? What sprint can we fit in building this, this way to get the data into those ad platforms? Then whenever we add a new ad platform, they'd have to do it all over again. 15 minutes. We solved the problem in 15 minutes. It was not a headache. And so that's really the value of reverse ETL in this instance. It lets you focus on the part of the problem that is essential to the project working, not on the pipes and wires of getting data from A to B. So any questions on that particular use case? It's about as simple bread and butter as it can get. So not a whole lot of nuance in there. Okay. So closing up, I want to talk about just a couple of other ways that we use reverse ETL right now. But we also sync custom audiences into ad platforms to help with targeted advertising. Once again, it took a couple of days to work with marketing to figure out exactly what those audiences ought to be. And then we're able to just push that straight into our ad platforms so that when you get onto whatever platform, you see a Lucid chart advertisement that is meaningful to you, that pertains to something that you're interested in. Just this morning, we set up a sync to push successful referrals to our affiliate marketing platform. So this is letting us have people go out there and help spread awareness of our product, and then we pass them some value based on what they bring into us. And instead of having to build a custom pipe to the API just for that, we could just spend that 15 minutes to set up a sync. We also send information on users and accounts to our customer onboarding platform. That's closer to the marketing platform example, where it's this long process of working with our stakeholders to say, well, which users ought to go into the onboarding platform, and what information should go in there, and how should we reflect it. And by the way, we need to be able to send them emails, so that becomes a feed into our marketing automation platform. This lets the focus be on the business logic and not on the pipes and wires. And it keeps our data warehouse as the single source of truth for all of those particular bits of business logic. Now we have some plans for next steps, things we want to do. I was in a meeting this morning where we talked about sending information on leads from either marketing or our products into our CRM. We've got new ad platforms that we're adding, and sending them offline conversions will be pretty simple and straightforward. And then we actually we're looking at using it to augment our in-house data issue alerting, mostly because it lets you specify Slack as a destination that you can send data to. And that's just a great way to ping people that need to get alerted about something going on in our data stack. And the thing I want to leave you with is my experience is that reverse ETL has allowed people across our business to use data in their native tools while still keeping the data warehouse as a single source of truth. Instead of having the logic spread out and asynchronous, it lets it all be in one place that can be version controlled and centrally understood. And this has helped keep our data a lot more consistent than it would be otherwise. Any questions?
Hey, Weston. Thanks for the awesome talk, by the way. So, I guess, did you have any initial hesitations, or I think another way of asking, did the broader data team have any hesitations about embarking on reverse ETL and trying it out?
Yeah, I feel like there's a few different answers to that question. Our team was super excited to try it out, mostly because we're already answerable for all of the data in all those third-party systems. Whenever it's inconsistent with our data warehouse, people come to us and say, why is your data wrong? Or why doesn't this match up? So we're already the ones who have to be answerable for data inconsistencies. If I could tell you how many times people have come to me and said, hey, this financial information is incorrect, and we dig into it, and my information is definitely not correct. It's just not making its way properly to where it needs to go. So we were super excited. No reservations about implementing this, because it makes sure that we can keep it consistent, which makes life easier for us. Now, this is a very new, the tools that do this are pretty new. So there's some hesitancy to take on a brand new tool that isn't necessarily established. Fortunately, any of my fears about that have not been founded. We've had great experiences so far. We did POCs with a couple of different tools, and we did purchase one, and we've had great experiences. Now, the people we're working with, I would say that kind of gets into the organizational change piece. Any change can be scary for people. And in particular, where they used to have a process for getting the data they want, and now you're coming to them and saying, well, don't talk to that person, talk to this person. And we're not going to ask you the questions they used to ask. We're going to ask all these really uncomfortable questions like, how are you going to use that data? Is that really the data that you need? There's a learning curve, if not some fear. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Awesome.
Hey,
Question,
Alec.
does your warehouse use columnar data layout? Yes. We use Snowflake. It's a columnar data store. We've had great experiences with it. I know there's a lot of other great warehouse storage solutions out there, but that's the one we use.
A question I have is, did you experience or notice any interesting feedback loops between your source system, your data warehouse, and then re-injecting that data back into your source system?
Yeah, I was hoping somebody would ask this question. The answer is we have not. And I think that there's definitely a world where you can get yourself into trouble because you no longer have a directed analytic graph of data flows because you're looping back on yourself and you are putting data into a system that you're also pulling data out of. I was actually just talking to some people this morning about this specific concern for putting data into our CRM. And the best way to make sure that that does not happen is you look at any specific data table or data object in a tool somewhere, you find a specific field in it, and you need to be able to guarantee that for any field, there is only one tool that is keeping that up to date. The place where you run into feedback loops and trouble is when you have multiple different things that could be keeping that field up to date, and they don't know about each other, and they're not talking to each other. Now, there's nothing to stop you from, say, pushing leads into your marketing software, and then pulling those leads out and then saying like, oh, this lead is in there, therefore we ought to keep it updated. Like, don't do that. But it's actually pretty easy to avoid because usually the data that you're pushing into the system is very different from the data that you're trying to get out. Like the data you're getting out is stuff like somebody filled out a form, or we've got a new opportunity with this client. Whereas the data you're pushing in is something like, this is the current subscription level of that client, or this is when they were last active in our product. Does that help?
Yeah, it certainly does. I mean, do you maintain any sort of like version history of data that goes back into these source systems via reverse ETL?
For some fields, yes. For some fields, no. Yeah, it really kind of depends. There's some where that's actually built in because we have their history back to the dawn of time. There's some where we haven't yet built that kind of tracking. So it really kind of depends on which one we're talking about. Sorry, that's not a super great answer.
That's fine. These are still new technologies, right? So I'm not expecting like, yeah, we're using like reverse change data capture and stuff. So
yeah. I mean, I have put some thought into whether I ought to do some snapshotting on it and like maintain a time span fact table of what the state of this thing was at this point in time. It's more likely that I'll probably just get on a phone with Hightouch, our vendor, and ask them when they plan to implement that so I can see it. Don't tell my
yeah, I
son
think
that.
it's
They probably don't want to do that.
oh no, I totally don't talk to them at all.
That's a lie.
But no, I mean because it's interesting with the especially when you're generating predictions, just because of the potential for data drift at some point, but not being aware of it because you don't have prior context. So
Yeah, and that kind of gets into, just the challenge of creating a rigorous statistical model. Fortunately, we hire people who are better at stats than I am.
good idea. So what other questions do people have? I guess another question is, what's people's sense of this? Would you find something like reverse ETL useful at at your work or in the environment that you're in?
Well, I've done a lot of work integrating separate systems, and the more I hear about this, the more I feel like it's just treating the data warehouse as a first-class citizen rather than downstream from everything else. Because I've worked in systems where they have like huge companies where they have different silos, they all interact with each other, pull data from each other, and one may be a given source of truth for whatever it's doing, but not for the other stuff. And it sounds like in this case, it's exactly that, like taking data from another system, enriching it, and then sending it back as a first-class citizen, like a standard application database might be in the case of an ETL pipeline.
I mean, I'll speak a little loosely here, but it's kind of like if the data warehouse is allegedly a source of truth for business logic and metrics, then it seems kind of silly to keep that data cooped up in there and not let it go to the places where it'll be used. Like, I mean, who here has built a dashboard that never got used? Like, everybody raise your hand. And that's because you build what people want and then they don't do it because it's not in the convenient place for them. So let's just put it in the convenient place for them.
Yeah, exactly.
I can see a good use case for this. For example, we maintain 2 weeks of data in Elasticsearch database. It's expensive, of course, because it's all indexed. So we have a retention policy of 2 weeks. But then, sometimes we need to do exploration of older data, right? So seeding that older data from a data warehouse into Elasticsearch seems like something that would be a good use case for reverse ETL. Am I on the right track on this?
I mean, that's actually something I've thought a bit about. We haven't implemented it yet. All of our reverse ETL goes between our warehouse and third-party tools. We could absolutely use it to transfer between our own systems. We just don't because we have in-house stuff that we cobbled together and it's not broken yet. But maybe there will come a day where we say, gosh, we should really be using this between some of our internal stuff too.
And so did you implement your own reverse ETL system or you're using one of those that you mentioned?
We're using hightouch. We did think about implementing our own and we looked at the ETL world and basically said, gosh, there's so many tools out there that will let you, pick anything from list A and move it to any data warehouse of list B. And they've got more efficiency than we can build on an in-house tool. So why don't we think about doing that for reverse ETL as well? So we decided to buy rather than build.
And is that a SaaS solution or it runs on-prem?
It is a SaaS solution, but similar to a lot of SaaS ETL tools, it's like they're all encrypted during movement and stuff. They go through a lot of stuff to resolve security concerns and whatnot.
Yeah, I guess if you're using Snowflake, then your security restrictions are kind of loose.
Yeah, you're already in the cloud if you're using Snowflake.
Yeah, and you allow your data to leave your data center.
Correct.
Oh, do they have on-prem deployments for these tools?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
I doubt it, but
let me just look at their. Yeah, let me keep talking. I'm gonna do a bit of digging.
No, I mean, they might be able to hook up to on-prem databases, but their tool itself, I think, lives in the cloud.
It's not like a hosted client or something, right? They're gonna put on the box. I think they called it in Silicon Valley. Yeah, I mean, it's a SaaS service. You sign up for it. So they just charge you by the number of, what was the last time I checked? Yeah, just number of destination fields, as they call them.
Mhm.
So in your case, hightouch would use a Snowflake as an input. What would be a sample output data source?
Right now, we've got destinations set up with Google Ads, Facebook Ads, Bing, Marketo, Salesforce, Gainsight PX, Partner Stack. I might be forgetting a couple.
Got it. Yeah, I thought that you would have like some of your relational databases or like, I don't know, Elasticsearch.
Yeah, so in Snowflake is both, it separates compute and storage. So it's pretty inexpensive for storage. So we don't have a separate data lake. Now our production database for our product, that's totally separate.
Got it. Thank you.
I've got another use case that, let me turn my video on here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got another use case that might be the same thing that you're doing. So we have a data warehouse where we keep PagerDuty incident data that's been merged with, enriched with other information, chatbot information and other sources. And that data warehouse is used for analytics so teams can understand how they're doing. Sorry about the dogs.
No worries. You've got a beautiful backyard as well.
Thank you. And then our customer service organization pulls data out of that data warehouse into their remedy instance so that the customer service teams can be using our data warehouse data as the single source of truth of what's happening right now in applications across the company. So the interesting things about our situation is that, the data warehouse, so to speak, needs to be low latency. It's not something that updates once a day. It's updating from minute to minute, to suit this purpose. So it sounds like the same thing that you're describing, but we wrote the reverse ETL to go into the customer service systems ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and usually the way this thing is working is it's basically, say you pointed at a table in your data warehouse, it keeps a version of that sometimes in another place in your own data warehouse, and it basically compares that for changes, and then it just pushes the changes over to where they're going. So whether you're checking it once every 15 minutes or once a day, it's moving the same volume of data a day. It's not like checking it more often means more data volume, because it's only looking for changes.
Interesting. Okay. Cool.
I sort of compare this to, I think everyone's written a connector from a source system to their data warehouse, right? And I suspect a lot of people have actually written reverse ETL solutions, and it just wasn't called that back in the day. I know for a lot of projects we had to do like moving data back into AdWords, for example, that kind of stuff. So
it's kind of one of those things where it seems so simple that it's like, why didn't I come up with that? Like,
yeah,
of course, there's going to be a need to pull data out of a generic warehouse and put it into something else.
Well, I know when Matt Deaver and I were working together at this place, I remember that, this company called Fivetran had reached out about this new product at the time. I think it must have been 2015 or 16, but they're like, yeah, you can just move data into Redshift and it's really easy. It's a click of a button. I was like, that's stupid. We have our own stuff. And in retrospect, I was the really dumb one who didn't get it at the time. So, because that would have saved a lot of time. I think it was only $100 a month at the time. So
that's kind of the way I think about it. Like, say for some reason, their connection between Snowflake, like their connection to get data into, we use Marketo breaks. Like, instead of it being 5 people that are all yelling at one engineer who like had 10 other things planned for this sprint, in-house, there's now like 500 people yelling at like 100 engineers whose entire job is to keep that thing working. So just tends to make me feel more confident about the, ease of maintenance for that process.
I don't think you can understate that, especially with stuff like this now. I think the integration space is really interesting because I think a lot of it's just kind of sort of table stakes now. The need to write a lot of this stuff, I think, is quickly going away unless you have something super custom that you need to do. But for the most part, like integration, whether it's into a data warehouse or out, is I think becoming it's a solved problem.
Mhm.
So you can find other things to yell at people about instead of that one. So.
Now, I would say one thing about reverse ETL is that it raises the stakes for your data warehouse. Like previously, if you're wrong, some human is going to be like, hey, Weston, this number isn't right. And like you hurt that relationship and you feel silly, but you have the comfort of knowing that there was a human that looked at it and caught it. With reverse ETL, you really have to be able to stand behind your data transformations because that data is going out the door and maybe emails are getting sent and maybe it's affecting the way that you bid on keywords. And like it's a little bit of a gut check that makes you sit down and think about just how confident are you in your data warehouse. But that's also like our entire job, to like be great at data transformation and to be able to stand behind our work.
Yeah, but there's a network effect. It makes more sense for you to spend that time to validate that data because you've got more consumers who will use it. So a virtuous cycle kind of thing. Yeah.
And fewer of them who are asking for ad hoc data pulls for the data that you're just serving up in their native tool.
Yeah.
What are some ways that you validate your transformations?
Oh gosh, that is like a whole other thing.
Well, now we have a meetup topic for next year. So,
I mean, my take on validation is there's a few different parts of it. The biggest thing is just understanding, like, are there rows everywhere I expect there to be rows and no rows where I don't expect there to be rows, testing for grain completeness, that kind of stuff. And then there's basically saying, are the values all what they ought to be, which for me says like, okay, I'm going to identify all the different ways that a certain entity can flow through my model. And at the end of all of that, does it give me the result that I expect? So find test cases, follow them through the logic, and make sure that those test cases, to use mathematical terms, are one-to-one and on-to. You're covering the entire space of potential outcomes of your data model and making sure that all of them are getting hit correctly. But that is a true challenge that I think there's still work in the field to figure out like really good ways to validate without it taking 10 years. It ran in SQL isn't sufficient validation in my book.
with that, with those sorts of sakes, I would think so, right? So, interesting.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, comments from the audience?
I mean, I kind of feel like people in this group have got to already be doing this, at least on an ad hoc basis. What's the benefits to getting it under a platform?
What do you mean by that?
Also, like, it's not like people suddenly have a need to get data into their third-party tools that never existed before. And some of that data is definitely already coming out of data warehouses because it's right there. But I imagine a lot of it is like somebody wrote up a custom job that's running on Airflow or some other job scheduler. And the difference between that and this is just like, it's now a platform where that's all that it does. It's built into a system that's generic and fast. So I feel like this isn't inventing a new need in a lot of use cases so much as just taking a solution already out there and streamlining it.
That's interesting. It definitely turns your data warehouse more into an appliance than it used to be.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember some pushback I was reading on, when they posted the promotion for this on LinkedIn, somebody was saying, oh, reverse ETL seems stupid. Like, why not just do that all in Salesforce or something instead of just pushing it to your data warehouse and then piping it back into Salesforce? And I don't really have an answer for that one way or the other. So
I mean, that's great if you want Salesforce to be your data warehouse, but that's kind of what it sounds like to me.
yeah, it sounds expensive and cumbersome. Everybody I know who tries to do even something that's pushing Salesforce a bit ends up, there's a reason Dreamforce has a lot of people that show up to it and a lot of them are consultants. Let's put it that way. So
Yeah. But I just think of it as like, let each tool be good at the thing it's good at. Salesforce isn't a data warehouse, so don't make it into one.
yeah.
Let it be a CRM.
Well, cool. I don't see any other audience participation, so I think we'll
Cool.
probably good time to wrap it up. Almost on the hour actually, so it's awesome. Weston, this is a great talk. Love to have
Oh,
you
thank
back
you.
sometime. Yeah, I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing over at Lucid. So
Mhm.
I'll stop recording now. Actually, before I hit stop record, how would people find out more about you and the fantastic work you're doing over at Lucid?
What was that?
How would people find out more about you and the fantastic work that you're doing
Yeah,
over at Lucid?
hit me up on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way to connect. I'd love to talk with people about what we're doing. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Well, thanks. I'll stop recording.